Thank you. You're too kind. You haven't heard the talk yet, so reserve some for the end. So the last time that I did this talk, 50% were inspired, motivated, engaged, thought it was awesome. Well, the other 50%, they thought it was bullshit. They thought I was lying. They thought I was making it up. It's too good to be true. But I stand here before you now, middle-aged person from England, to tell you that this is the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, and I have to be truthful, because Mihal is in the audience and he lived through this, so check with him later. And it's all about going from idea to value. So we're going to cover in today's talk these things, what value really is and what's cost, why that matters for your career. We're going to cover how we go from idea to value, and we're going to cover how we went from 14-month release cycle to a weekly release cycle in a startup. And there's going to be 9 lessons, anchored by the first one and the last one. Are we ready? Cool. Well, before we discovered value, we were doing slow, boring, and ineffective software testing. It would start with the specification of amazement, which would describe this beautiful product that we were all going to build. From there, we would go to find the gaps. How many test cases did we need to rewrite? How many could we reuse? To do this, we had to consult the test case management system of doom. And from there, we would use a simple calculation that worked on the assumption that every tester could test 10 test cases per day. We knew we needed 4,000. That gave us an estimate. So armed with this estimate, I would head to the project office and give them the good news. And after lots of debate and arguments and comments about how testing was slow, boring, and ineffective, they would add it together with all of the other estimates onto a Gantt chart of devastation, which was our roadmap to disappointment. And from there, the fun would really begin. While the developers were writing code, we would write the test plan of brilliance, the document that nobody would read. So we filled it full of funny quotes, film quotes, music quotes, and silly diagrams. My favorite, the test go for architecture. Nobody read it, nobody spotted it. We had a bit of fun. It kept the spirits high. Then eventually we'd get a build, and it would explode, causing a series of small fires, injuring several ops engineers. So we would throw it back to development with bug reports full of scorn and disappointment. And then eventually we would start, and we'd start testing, and the leaders and managers would buy us pizza and ask us to work the weekend. By now, we were all over the place. The pressure was mounting, so we hired anybody in the organization who could use a keyboard and a mouse, and they became a tester. Sales, marketing, HR, anybody who could click a button was a tester. I mean, we were so far behind that we recruited these 4 retired gentlemen from the local park, and all of them said testing's slow, it's boring, it's ineffective. And then eventually, finally, somebody in the ivory tower of distaste, far removed from the project in their leadership meeting, decided to ship it, even though we were only 87% complete. You'll like the Hungarian pictures that I've tried to include. Our customers wanted a thing of majestic beauty. This is what we shipped them. So they would throw it back and threaten to leave the organization. So we'd go through this old drama again and again for a few more weeks until finally we shipped this monstrosity into production. Can you see what I've done there? Don't criticize my design skills, please. And what do we always do after a project? We run a retro. It started with facts, moved on to accusations, then it moved on to shouting, until it eventually descended into a fight. After the fire service had put out the fire, and the ambulance had taken away the injured, and the police had arrested half of the project team, we swore we would never, ever work in this way again. And do you know what we did? We took a few days off, we came back to work, and we did the same thing again and again. But not now, because I'd taken on a new role, and I'd taken on an ability to lead a team in a startup. I joined a startup, and I was able to put value at the heart of everything that we did. Now, the dictionary definition of value is fine, but in an organization, it means something different. So let me come on to that in a minute. But as soon as we put value at the heart of everything we did, we saw the business go from literally zero. We could barely make payroll. We were buying production servers off eBay. We had an air conditioning unit in the middle of the office. It was just awful. Then it went to a 350, 360 million sale. The value of testing went up. It went from something that people with test in their job titles did to something that everybody did. The value of the culture went up, and you can ask Michal whether we got this right. We like to think that we created a culture that enriched the lives of everybody who worked in it. And my career went through the roof with this too, from tester to engineering manager to vice president of software, vice president of HR, interim CIO, and now as a consultant for the last 10 years, helping organizations do this very thing. And it was all about value. So that's what we're going to cover. This is the first lesson. We want to be going from an idea to value smoothly, quickly, and effectively. It's everybody's job in an organization to do that. But we also want to balance that with cultivating a workplace that enriches the lives of everybody who works in it. Now, to bring this to life, I'm going to introduce you to a man who had a very big mustache, magnificent mustache, the kind of mustache that enters a room a few minutes before he does. It was huge. And he was a senior leader in a very, very large technology company that you will have heard of. But every time he pitched to his senior leadership team for more budget, more help, more resource, big ideas that will change the business, they ignored him. And so I saw him pitch, and I gave him a bit of coaching, and we orientated everything around value, which I'm going to share with you in a minute. Next time he went in, instead of the execs, and by the way, most executives aren't like little puppies. I just thought that picture was quite cool. They were engaged. They listened to him. They bought into some of his ideas, not all of them, but some of them. He got the money, he got the ideas, he got the support from executives. So here's the thing. We always want to go from an idea to value. We have an idea for a new product, new business, new book, new podcast, whatever. We have an idea. It always starts with an idea in somebody's head. And then we want to go to value. What does value mean? Well, there's 4 types of value in an organization. And this is what we learned earlier on and what I helped Mr. Mustache develop. The first one is cost reduction. Is everyone working on some form of cost reduction? Yeah? Value. Okay, this cost reduction helps to keep the organization efficient. Then you've got enablement value, which helps to keep the business operational. So think about those things you just have to do. All those cloud technologies, Microsoft Office, whatever it is that you're using, you've got to use those in order to keep the business operational. And then the third one there is experiments, and we should run more of these. That keeps the business learning, so we can get better, we can get smarter. And then the fourth one is financial value. This keeps the business alive. If we don't have money coming in, we don't have a business. Okay? Now, the interesting thing is that financial value is always external to the organization. And it happens by building something worth paying for and actually having a customer who's willing to give you some money for that thing. The money is a side effect of having something worth paying for. And it's always outside your organization. All those other 3 values and everything else involved is cost. Now, as soon as we realize that and appreciate that, the way that we look at our work changes. Those meetings that result in another meeting is cost. That decision that never gets made is cost. That argument over which methodology, framework, concept, or approach is the best one is cost. And all of that is standing between going from an idea to value. With value, you get clarity. This is lesson number 2. Then you get alignment, then you get action. So let me bring this to life. When we were in the startup, we had clarity, and we got clarity by doing what I call is painting a bright picture of the future. For us, these are these 4 things. We wanted to go from 14-month releases to weekly releases, to reduce the costs involved and to generate value. We wanted to create a culture that enabled everybody in there to be enriched and enjoy working in the organization. Of course, we had investment. We had 110 million invested, and they wanted a 3x return on that investment, pretty standard for most startups. We also did a cloud SaaS platform, so we wanted 99.999% uptime And trust me, in the early days, it was probably only about 1% uptime. It was pretty poor. So that was our painted picture of the future. Now, when you paint a picture of the future, you get a few interesting things. You get that clarity, and it gives you focus. You can focus on what it is that you want to do between idea and value towards that painted picture. It attracts people to work in your organization. When you have a really interesting, compelling, exciting, bright painted picture of the future, the right people will want to come and help you achieve that. It also gives you insights for decision making. Does anyone have to make decisions every day? Yeah? Does anyone recognize this here? It's Alice in Wonderland. Has anyone seen it? Read the book? Seen the play? There's a famous scene where Alice is walking up down a road, and she comes to an opportunity to take a direction. There's about 7 or 8 different roads that she can go down, and she doesn't know which one to pick. And she sees a cat up in the tree, and she asks the cat, and the cat can talk, she asks the cat, which one should I choose? And the cat says, well, where are you going? And she says, I don't know. And the cat says, well, it doesn't matter which one you choose. And we face that day in, day out. Do we do this? Do we do that? With clarity, it enables you to make a decision. How could we ever expect people in our organization to make good decisions if we don't know what we're heading towards? However, a bright painted picture isn't going to create itself. So we need to ask a really interesting question. If this bright painted picture is so compelling, so interesting, so exciting, it's really what we want, what is stopping us from achieving that tomorrow, or next week, or next month? And the answers to that question are problems and opportunities. And that gives you attention, it gives you focus, and you solve those issues. That's exactly what we did. What is stopping us going from now to weekly releases? And we identified all of the big problems, and you're going to hear about some in a minute. And we started solving them one by one by one. Now, you'll never hear me talk about Agile. Is anyone working Agile? Yay. Awesome. I worked in a company that had 100 Agile coaches, and guess what? We had 200 different opinions on what Agile was. I never talk about Agile. Instead, I talk about releasing agility. Agility means moving smoothly and quickly towards your goals. Release means to set free by overcoming problems. So, lesson number 3, value testing and testers. So this was our first problem between where we are now and our bright painted picture. It's testing. It's always testing. Is it always testing? It's a problem. We had so little automation. Literally no unit tests, no integration tests, no end-to-end tests, no automation at all. And this system that we'd inherited as a startup was massive. Truly phenomenally huge system that did cloud-based telephone systems. And it was only testers that did the testing. So this was our first testing challenge. We needed automation. Now, I may swear a little bit during this section about automation. Forgive me. So we had some choices to make. Number 1, we could outsource automation, or even worse, we could buy into the belief that there is a silver bullet tool that could do it all for us. There's a few smirks in the audience there, and some of the expo sponsors might be frowning at me right now. We didn't want to do that. Do you know why? Adds cost. And we were trying to reduce costs and add value. We also wanted to own the code ourselves. We could keep our testers running those tests manually, if I'm still allowed to use that phrase of manual testing. But we'd need about 2,000 testers in order to cover the whole product to shrink that release cycle down. And that would add cost. The third thing is we could just not test huge parts of the product and ship it more often. But that's quite risky, especially if we're after 99.999% uptime. Here's where I might swear. We could ask testers to learn how to code and build the automation themselves. Is that still a thing in the industry? Yeah. The message came through loud and clear when we were doing this, that if you don't know how to code, you don't learn how to code, and this was at conferences and events, you won't have a job in the future. Swap out automation for AI, and maybe we're having the same conversation. It was bullshit back then, and it's pretty much bullshit still today. There are loads of ways you can add value in an organization without learning how to code. If you want to learn how to code and you're good at it, go for it. I absolutely suck at writing code. I tried for years. I felt inferior, incapable, like I was somehow not deserving to be a tester. I just don't know how to write code. It's just not my thing. If you want to do it, go for it. If not, there are many, many, many ways that you can add value in an organization without learning how to write code. So we didn't want to do that because that would take time, and time was what we were trying to shrink down. So we had another option. Programmers built it. Do you know which one of those 5 we chose? Have a guess. 5. Spot on. We decided on option 5. Who better to write production-grade test automation than the people who write production-grade code? So how did we do this? Well, we followed Edward Deming's principle that quality belongs to everybody. We changed the system, and we removed the safety net of test. We said to every single developer in the team, you are not going to have a tester for the next 2 months. You wrote the code. You make sure it works. You can imagine how well that went down. But it worked. Within about 3 weeks, we had a prototype that one of the developers had built using Selenium. We had automated builds within about 5 weeks. We had about 50% test coverage in about 4 months. Unit tests went up. People started doing them once for all. And the release cycle, that thing that we were so desperate to achieve, was reduced from 14 months to 5 months. Testers were still needed. They paired with coders, programmers, during the writing of code. That was a magical, beautiful thing to do. People using their strengths and their skills to complement each other to generate value for the organization. They helped define what good tests look like. They trained the developers in how to do exploratory testing, how to do critical thinking, a lot of other stuff like that. It was great. Everyone was learning off everybody else. It wasn't always perfect, and Mihal's looking at me as though I'm lying. There were occasional slippages here. But here's the thing. Even with higher growing levels of automation, we still found loads of bugs. A synergy had been found. Testers and coders, programmers, were seen as equal contributors. However, we had just one more step to do to make that complete. That is where we started to value equality. Is it still a thing where testers don't get paid the same as developers? Yes. It was a problem back then, it's a problem now. We tried to address this because we were in a situation where everybody's contribution was valuable to the business. It wasn't about whether you were a tester, programmer, scrum master, product manager. You were all contributing to the business. So we tried. We found money. The execs trusted us because we were focusing on value and cost, which is what matters to executives. And they trusted us to make the right decisions for the team. And we found money, and we boosted salaries. And it created a problem for the testers because they could never leave because they were paid way more at our company than they were anywhere else. But it was good for us, it was good for them, and we tried to get them closer together. We never quite managed to make them the same, but we weren't far away at all. Because it wasn't about your job title, it was about your contribution to delivering value to the organization. We had another problem though, because we could build, we could test, we could do magical things with the code, but we couldn't get it into production. Operations became a bottleneck. Now bear in mind, this is way before DevOps became a very standard thing to do. So, to say that our relationship with operations was good is completely a lie. It was like a running turf war between us and them. We didn't see eye to eye, let's put it that way, between development and operations. Now here's why. Because operations had a single goal, 99.999% uptime. Do you know what the best thing to do to achieve that uptime? Never release software. That's the safest bet to do. We had a goal, separately, which was release new code weekly. That's what we were aiming for. So you can imagine, we had different goals, we had different ideologies, we had different ways of looking at the world. So here's what we did. There's a guy called Yves Moreau who works for BCG, Boston Consulting Group, and he's got the 3 C's. Now, everyone focuses on collaboration. You can't go into an organization without hearing, we should collaborate better, let's collaborate, we need more collaboration. He defines collaboration as solving problems and working with people that you like. Let's collaborate. Sounds cool, awesome, great. Coordination is about putting all the pieces together to create a plan, hopefully not a Gantt chart of devastation. But the third C is the most important of the three, and that is cooperation. And you do not need to like people to cooperate with them. So here's what we did. We set a shared goal for both dev and ops, 99.999% uptime, and weekly releases. So this is about changing the system of work. So we paired dev and ops on every single problem that we encountered, a developer and an ops engineer working together side by side. We gave 2 or 3 devs to the operations team to automate the crap out of everything. We put devs on call. And by the way, when I say dev, I am talking about programmers and testers. I should qualify that. Okay? We put them on call. Honestly, if you can write code and you can automate and you can think critically, getting woken up at 1 o'clock, 3 o'clock, and 5 o'clock because the software's fallen over, it breeds creativity. You soon find ways to prevent that from happening. We built rollback and monitoring because we had no idea what was happening in production. No idea at all. There's a problem, there's an error log. What does the error log even mean? You know, nobody knew anything. We were blind to what was happening. We even stuck developers and testers and product owners and everybody on the front line answering calls from the customer. Now, there's a bit of a risk with that. Customer phones in and you get somebody who's maybe not so good at their customer relationship skills, but we paired them with headsets so that the support engineer and the developer could both talk to the customer. Again, hearing firsthand, what are the problems? What actually matters to the most important person in the business, the customer? Because they're the ones giving us some money for something worth paying for, which keeps the business alive. We had real-time support. Honestly, when you're working on support, they started to build tools that would scrape logs. We could identify customers' contact numbers coming in, so we could pop up screens to say, hey, Mr. Brown, welcome. I see you've got an issue here. Automated everything, gave data to everything, brought it to life. Here's an interesting thing. The ops engineers, there's a reason why maybe they didn't change the fact that it fell over at 1, 3, and 5 o'clock, because they got paid overtime for every time they had to get up in the middle of the night. So you can imagine their enthusiasm when we said we're going to automate it and it'll never fall over in the middle of the night again. It wasn't running very high, let's put it that way. So what we did, we boosted their salaries, we got rid of the bonus overtime, and we rewarded stability rather than firefighting. We built a minimalist, robust release process. We could now build, test, deploy. We had real-time production monitoring. We had keystone toggles. We could turn features on in production if we wanted to. We could have testers testing in live, on the live servers, testing new features to reduce that cycle time, to reduce that time down. And we did no more Friday releases, because if you've ever released on a Friday and it doesn't work, that's your weekend gone. We could basically test, build, deploy, monitor anything, wherever we wanted. We finally got to a monthly release cadence, which is pretty good. And that's when we moved from risk-based testing to value-based testing. That's Budapest, by the way, in the background. Can you see that? I was here a few months back. That's where all the photos are from. There are all these larders queuing up on the road. It was amazing. Wonderful thing. So here's what we found when we started real-time monitoring the system, when we started getting data from the actual application itself. We found unused areas where nobody ever went to that part of the product. Why is that there? Let's get rid of the code. You get rid of the code, there's less code to test, there's less functionality and features. We found high-traffic common features, so things that people really did use all of the time. Well, that is where we're going to focus our energy and attention. We actually saw what the users did on the system instead of guessing or asking them. Have you ever asked a user what they do? They're never accurate. But if you see them doing it, brilliant. We saw them doing it through the code itself. We could see the journeys they were on through the actual application. That's where we focus our energy and attention. We could see drop-off points, high traffic areas that dropped off. Is there something wrong? Have we got a failed release? And we could roll back, put the old version back in. And we saw new features that weren't being used, things that people had asked for, an idea that we'd flown through to what we thought was value, but people weren't using it. Customers weren't paying for it. Why is that? Was sales not selling it? Professional services not training people on it? Or was the thing that we released not valuable? We got insight, we got data. And all of this allowed us to collaborate and cooperate with product sales, professional services, everyone else involved in the organization. Because remember, everybody involved in this is cost. So if we can streamline the way that we all work together, we can get a value sooner with a reduction in cost. And it was great work done by everyone in the team. But they were all human, just like we are in here. And do you know what humans do? They make mistakes. So we started to value mistakes. We made we made a ton of mistakes. Wrong choice of tech, wrong hires, wrong goals, wrong code, wrong testing, wrong test approach. We made a ton of mistakes, loads and loads of mistakes. But a mistake is nothing more than a gap between what you expected and what happened. And in the middle is an opportunity to make yourself and the business better. That's all a mistake is. So we ran lots of 5 whys. I'm sure you're familiar with the 5 whys. We won't go into detail of that. But we ran them for everything that happened. A customer escalation, a failed build, something that went wrong, finding a bug in live that we absolutely should have caught earlier than that. We did 5 whys. We made a lot of mistakes, but we also made the business better. By the end of my journey in this, I think we'd run about 305 whys. And every single time you ask why, you get an opportunity to improve the business. That is thousands of opportunities. Cultural changes, process changes, people changes, training, all sorts of different ways to make the organization better so we can go from idea to value in the shortest amount of time. Problems are obvious. Yeah, we solved a lot of those. But there's also something else called friction. I want to introduce you to a really neat model that is really helpful, and it's called friction. And on the other side of friction is often reward. But people run away from friction. I don't know whether anyone remembers, but maybe 5 or 6 years ago in the testing community at the conferences, you heard people talk about avoiding bad work. Has anyone heard that? Almost every speaker was speaking about it for about 2 years. Not illegal, immoral, dangerous work. We absolutely should try and avoid that. Just bad work, hard work, tedious work, work that doesn't make us feel so good day to day. But on the other side of that hard work is reward. There's a model by a guy called Richard Hammond, not the Top Gear presenter. It's a different person, who has a model called the friction versus reward. Now, I noticed here in Budapest you have the Lidl supermarkets. We have those in the UK. We have Aldi and we have Lidl. Do you have Aldi here as well? Yeah? They're low-cost supermarkets. If you go to one, particularly in the UK, the queues are massive. There's never enough staff. There's no home delivery. They're not kitted out with all the latest tech that you might find in some of the bigger supermarkets. The friction is reasonably high. But the reward? You get lower prices. And the queues are massive. So people don't mind the friction if they get the reward. You think about Amazon on your phone. Low friction. I need a new lamp. You have a look, you find the lamp, you order it, next day delivery. Low friction, high reward. Aldi, higher friction, high reward. So you have 3 choices with this model. Once you've identified the friction and you think it's worth resolving because there's a reward on the other side, you have 3 choices. You can reduce the friction like Amazon have done so that the reward's worth it. You can increase the reward so that people go through the friction in order to get that reward. Or you can do both, which is a wise move. So when I joined the organization, we plotted all of our problems that stood between where we are and our bright painted picture on the friction reward model. As you can see here on the left, low friction to high friction, running that way, low reward to high reward. It's a very simple tool, and I still use this day to day in consulting. When I joined, buying the product was really hard work, really difficult for our customers to buy it, really difficult to get them on the platform, and it was even worse for them to be a customer. There was very little reward for them in the early days, and it was hard to become a customer. Releasing software, 14 months, really high friction, very little reward, because at the end of that 14 months, it often fell over, and we had to do it again. Getting an issue raised with support was hard work. That was difficult, very little reward, because they very rarely dealt with it. Joining the company was high friction. Took about 2 months from going from first contact at a job advert to an offer or a rejection was about 2 months, 2.5 months. And let's be honest, in the early days, there wasn't much reward for working there either, unless you liked working the weekends after a failed build. Accessing the test servers, high friction, pretty good reward, because once you're on there, you could actually do some testing. You see how this works? So at the end of this journey, we moved everything down to the other end. We lowered the friction and we increased the reward. It's a very simple model, and you can apply it to almost anything. Releasing software, we could release wherever we wanted to get to. Accessing servers, joining the company, we went from that 2-month window to 2 weeks. We could go from an interview, job advert, to a decision in 2 weeks. It's the same principles, idea to value. I moved logically sideways, as you can imagine, from software engineering into HR in this company. It's a really logical move. I became the vice president of HR. The number one request that I got as vice president of HR was not about salary, not about bonus, not about perks. It was about teaspoons. I don't know whether it's the same in your office, but I would buy 200 teaspoons, and a week later there was only one left. So it was a high friction, but really high reward if you could find that last teaspoon. Yeah? So friction is potential problems. On the other side of friction is a reward. Okay, now only solve the problems that are on that path to your painted future. I see this a lot in organizations, because every organization has more problems than you could ever solve. So only be solving the ones that are standing between idea to value, or between where you are to your painted picture. Try and solve those systemic problems that are across functions. They're hard, but they're the ones that give you the big levers of change in an organization. There's a systems thinking belief that if you solve the shiny, interesting, easy problems, you create the problems of tomorrow. There's some truth to that. Opportunities always bring problems, and problems always create opportunities. It's a never-ending battle of solving problems in business. That's what business is. So by the end of all of this journey that we've been through, we managed to get to weekly releases. We could do daily if we wanted, but there was no need to do that. I might want to call out here that there is a big difference between being able to release software whenever you want to and release value, because value only comes when people buy something worth paying for. If you can ship daily but no one buys it, that's not a good thing. Programmers and testers pairing, everyone using creativity and insights and skills, recruitment shrunk, all the stuff we've talked about. Very few people left the team. Business consistently released value, and we went on this really big journey. It was a wonderful, wonderful journey. I want to leave you with lesson 9, because a lot of this is about being delivery focused, going from idea to value. But we need to balance that with creating a company and a culture that enriches the lives of everybody who works in it. There's a Japanese phrase called motanae, and I apologize if that is not how you pronounce it. And what it means is it's a regret of waste. Now, this is typically a regret of natural resources. And if we're going to regret wasting natural resources, then it's a mindset to think about how we can avoid that in the first place. But what about work? What about our humans' resources? And I'm not talking about HR, which are rarely humane or resourceful. We're talking about humans' resources, our resources of time, energy, and attention. It's my belief that many organizations squander that through confusion, through red tape, through bureaucracy, through endless discussions and pointless process and stupid meetings. And we spend our time day after day after day battling against problems that could and should be resolved. We should guard it. We should guard our own energy and attention and time, and we should guard everyone else's. And the best way to do that is by having clarity over what we're trying to achieve, alignment towards that, and the action will take care of itself. It is our most valuable resource. It never comes back once it's been spent. It's finite, and it's very, very easily squandered. So how do you do it? Provide that clear, compelling, painted picture. Go from idea to value. I want to call your attention to this last one, test, don't guess. Has anyone ever been involved in an ongoing debate about which process, which methodology, which approach is the best one to take? Yeah, lots of nodding. That's all cost. It's inside the organization, it's cost. And it's stopping you going from idea to value. There is no idea, no theory, no concept, no process that cannot easily, cheaply, safely, and effectively be tested, within an organization. So why don't we do more tests to see whether or not this thing is going to work? I often say that opinionated people go around the world annoying other people with opinions. We have it in our workplaces, and it's a waste of our human potential. So, imagine Mr. Mustache. He's late for a really big presentation. He pulls up in the taxi, he rushes out, he trips over his mustache, he slides across the lobby, rolls onto the stage, papers everywhere, and he's about to deliver a really good talk. He surveys the mess, drops the papers, and just talks to the audience. And he talks about going from idea to value, about protecting the most precious resource we have of time, energy, and attention. He talks about utilizing people for their strengths and their skills rather than just their job title. He talks about trying to balance equality across the team in terms of finances, in terms of all the other stuff that we hear about, diversity and everything else. He talks about overcoming problems. He talks about how on the other side of friction is a reward. And we can all resonate with this because this is what we go through every day. And don't forget that when we come up with an idea, until somebody gives us some money for that, there is absolutely no financial value in that. And it's our job to go from idea to value as smoothly, quickly, and effectively as possible, whilst cultivating a workplace that enriches the lives of everybody who works in it. And I have not yet met a leader on the planet, and I talk to a lot of leaders, who doesn't want better business results and the retention of good staff. Those two things, we should always balance those two things together. So with that, I am slightly ahead of schedule, which I'm sure you'll all be very pleased about, because I stand between now and the bar, or home time. What I do have, though, if I can very quickly spare a minute, is I have a whole load of free copies of my books here. This isn't a sales pitch, they're just free. I don't want to take these back to the UK because they're very heavy. I've got 2 books, Zero to Keynote, and Take a Day Off. Feel free to just come up afterwards, say hello, and you can have a copy of the book, okay? And with that, I just want to say thank you so much. I hope that's been useful and helpful, and I hope you go forth and protect your time, energy, and attention, and you go from idea to value. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And 5 minutes, that's actually pretty awesome. Also that you're giving free books, that's really nice. But they do have to say hello, right? It's not just come here, take the book and leave.
You've got to say hello, and say hi.
Maybe try to ask a smart question or something, Pretend you care. Okay, just joking, let's go. How to talk about value in a setup where your team plays an infinite game like support team or regression testing.
Support team, right, okay. Support in an organization, if you're in a support team, it's pure cost. Pure cost. Because you're supporting people who are using the products and services and tools that you've already sold, and therefore, pretty much with very few exceptions, you are a cost to the organization, which is fine. There's nothing to say we have to get rid of costs. We're always going to have costs. You can't do stuff without a cost. What we're trying to do here, when you think about going from idea to value, is if you can go 14 months between an idea and value, that's 14 months of cost, and then the value is released. If you can shrink that to 6 months, not only do you reduce the cost, but you also get that value earlier, and you can do another one as well and get 2 times the value in that same amount of time. But things like support and regression testing, they're all part of that process that need to be factored in. They are cost. However, one idea that might be interesting if you're in the support team or regression, more the support team, is have a think about the demand that does come into your team. I was talking to Hannah earlier about this. There's something called failure demand by a guy called John Seddon. If you've never heard of this, it's actually useful in support context. How much of the demand that you are having to service for your customers is generated from a failure to do something correctly the first time or to do something at all? In most support teams, when I've studied this, anywhere between 30 to 45% of the amount of demand coming in is because of a failure somewhere else in the organization. So if you can identify that and you can go and turn it off and stop it happening, then you can talk about value. You can talk about how much time you've saved, how much money you've saved. Regression testing, we just got to do it, but how much do you have to do? And can you change any of the other parts of the system to enable you to do that more smoothly and quickly? This isn't about getting rid of all the stuff in the mix of building high-quality products at all. This is about thinking, how can we optimize within that gap to try and deliver more value? I hope that answers the question.
Yeah, me too. Any tips on growing magnificent mustache, or as they would say, mustache?
Mustache.
Yeah, mustache.
Yeah, mustache. No, as you can see, I haven't got one. I can't grow one.
No, but that's really good.
I seem genetically incapable of growing a mustache, so no idea at all. Let's see if anyone in the audience has got a big mustache, and you can ask them how they got there. And this guy's mustache was massive. I'm not joking. It was absolutely huge. You needed to rest it on the table when he was sat down. It was huge.
Jesus.
Lovely guy, talented, very, very, very clever guy. Just big mustache and didn't talk about value.
Okay. Do you have any tips for reducing time-consuming, thus expensive meetings?
Yep, don't have them.
Yeah, cancel them. That was my idea. I'm thinking that's good.
So practically, the one thing we do when I go and work with organizations is there's always meetings, thousands of meetings. And the more remote we are, the more we have meetings, because you book a transactional time to talk to somebody. The key with any meeting when I'm going into it is, firstly, let's be clear. We're always talking about clarity and alignment and action. And we leave meetings not being clear, nobody's aligned, everybody comes away with different actions, nobody quite understands what's happening, so we have another meeting. So the first thing that I always do in a meeting is understand what's the purpose of the meeting. If we can get clear about why are we having this meeting, then we can understand whether or not the meeting should take place. And usually when I ask that, there's no clear purpose. We're just going to have a meeting to talk about costs, what's the purpose, what actions do we expect at the end of it? No answer, cancel the meeting. It's not quite as straightforward as being able to do that, but ultimately, if there's no purpose to the meeting, why are you having a meeting? That was just a blunt answer to that, just kill all meetings.
Nice, thanks, okay. Marco, I didn't understand the difference between risk-based and value-based testing. Thank you, Marco, for sharing. Okay, is that a question? Can you answer quickly? Because actually there's another question about value, and I think both is good.
Yep, okay, so when we were doing risk-based testing, we were looking at things like high code change areas, we were looking at things that maybe have been problematic in the past, we were looking at things that maybe we thought ourselves were high-risk areas, and bear in mind, risk is always subjective. And so we were focusing our testing on all those bits that we thought, the developers have changed this code here, so we should test that bit in the product. When you move to the value-based, we were focusing on what is our customer paying us for. So they're paying for a service. So how do they use that service? And from looking at that data, we were able to then say, the things we thought were risky are not the areas that actually the customer's using. So we could turn them off, we could just not test them. So that's the difference really. It's probably, you might say they're the same thing, but fundamentally for us, risk is what we think is risky, value is what the customer actually uses in the software.
Okay, I think this is too good, but let's finish up with this one. How can we measure value? What metrics to track?
Yep, so the most obvious thing when you talk about value is how much money you're making from what it is that you sell. So that's the obvious way. What I always say is, if you're speaking to executives, there's three things that they're particularly interested in. Number one is whatever you're going to suggest or do, is it going to make us more money? So that's the first value. Do we make money from whatever it is that we're doing? The second thing they're interested in, is it going to stop us from losing money? That's the cost. The third thing is, and me and Mike talked about this last night, is it going to keep me out of prison? So we're talking risk and compliance. Anything that you do, you want to have a whole new test architecture, you want to hire 15 new people, you need to couch it in terms of, is it going to help the organization make more money? Is it going to stop us losing money? Is it going to be a cost reduction? Or is it something we've got to do because it keeps us out of jail? So when we're talking about value, we can measure all the testing stuff we want, and we can have the most awesome test team with devs and pipelines and DevOps and awesome, brilliant, and we're able to get stuff into production, we can ship stuff every 5 hours, whatever. If nobody buys it, that's all cost. It's all cost. So when we obsess over getting things into production quickly, great, we should do that. But we have to understand what Tarek was talking about earlier. What is the value that people pay us for? And that is the true cost. Everything in the organization is cost. So whatever you're doing, measure how many meetings you have in, measure how long your delays are, how many failed builds, how many reworks you've got to do. You can measure all of that stuff. It's all cost because it's inside the organization. The question is the value you're generating from what you're building outweighing the costs that are involved with getting it in there? Very quickly, I worked with a very, very large enterprise organization that spent £10 million on shipping a product that generated £1,000 of revenue. That's a £9,000 loss. Okay? So these are the kind of things. There's another organization that identified £20,000 worth of costs that they could reduce from the system, and they spent £60,000 chasing that cost. This is what goes through executives' minds all the time. So whenever we're in the mix, we're arguing, we're debating, and we're contemplating, or we're not optimizing and solving problems, it's all cost. It's all cost. Our goal is to get value to the customer.
Okay, I'm guessing Michal would like to speak to you, but he has really lots of things to ask, but he's not going to be able to because our time is up late. Michal, we would like to see you because you have really good questions. You definitely deserve a book because we're not going to answer either of them, but you definitely deserve a book. Ladies and gentlemen, a huge applause for our last keynote. It was really, really great.
Thank you.